Welcome, everyone. We're really excited to have you join us in this webinar, Advancing Residential Energy Efficiency Through Rigorous Evaluation in the Climate Action Learning Lab. Just a heads up that this webinar will be recorded and we'll be taking a few screenshots throughout. For folks in the audience, we invite you to ask any questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll either respond in the chat or during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. My name is Sarah Van Ness, and I'm a Senior Policy and Training Associate at JPAL North America, and I'll be our moderator for today's webinar. Next slide, please. During the next hour, we'll also hear from Erin Graber, Environment, Energy, and Climate Change Sector Lead at JPAL North America, as well as Erica Myers, Associate Professor at the University of Calgary, Peter Christensen, Associate Professor at UC Santa Cruz, and Paul Francisco, Director of Indoor Climate Research at the Champaign County Regional Planning Commission. Throughout the webinar, we'll share a bit about how rigorous research, including randomized evaluations, can help answer questions about program effectiveness. We'll highlight the Illinois Home Weatherization Assistance Program evaluation as one example, and we'll hear some reflections from the team involved in this project on the process of forming successful researcher-government partnerships. We'll also share information and answer questions about the JPAL North America Climate Action Learning Lab opportunity. This is the second of two webinars sharing about the Climate Action Learning Lab, and thanks so much to those of you in the audience who joined us last week for our webinar focused on transportation decarbonization. On today's webinar, we'll similarly be sharing a brief overview of the Learning Lab, but today we'll be focusing our conversation on energy efficiency. In a moment, I'll pass it to Erin to provide a brief overview of JPAL North America's work in the climate action space, and she'll also introduce the Climate Action Learning Lab. Then Erica will deliver a brief presentation about the Illinois Home Weatherization Assistance Program evaluation, and we'll move into a conversation with Erica, Peter, and Paul to hear about their experiences and reflections working on the evaluation. Finally, we'll close with some Q&A from all of you in the audience and share next steps for those interested in applying to the Learning Lab. So let's go ahead and get into it. Erin, I'll pass it to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah. And hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here with all of you today and to share just a bit more about JPAL and our work in the climate mitigation space. So for those of you who are less familiar with JPAL, it stands for the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, and it was founded in 2003. And we're a research center that's based within the Department of Economics here at MIT. And Sarah and I work in the North America Regional Office. So this office is actually 12 years old, and it focuses specifically on research and policy within the North America region. JPAL's mission is to reduce poverty by ensuring that policy is informed by scientific evidence. So we have kind of three core functions to achieve this mission. The first is research. So we fund and run research with a broad network of academic researchers, including Peter and Erica on this call. And we focus kind of specifically on the methodology of randomized evaluation, which I'll talk about in just a couple minutes in a little bit more detail. The second core function is really policy outreach. So we aim to ensure that research can be translated into policy and practice, and that the results of our evaluations can really end up in the hands of decision makers who can really use that information to inform their programming. And the third core function is capacity building. So we lead evaluation trainings and programs. The Climate Action Learning Lab, which we'll talk about in a moment, is a good example of this. And we can provide these opportunities in order to build the capacity of nonprofit and government leaders to generate and use evidence and to really help these teams kind of think through how to do evaluations in practice. So these are kind of the three core functions that we focus on to connect the dots from research to action. So just kind of quickly, I wanted to talk a bit about JPAL North America's work specifically in the climate space. And this is really a top policy priority for us. So how is climate kind of related to poverty alleviation in the work that we do? So I think as many of you who are with us today know quite well, the US is currently the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. And structural discrimination has really led low-income populations and people of color to disproportionately experience really a range of climate-related hazards, both in the US and around the world. And this includes things like air and water pollution, loss of livelihoods, and increased risk of harm from extreme weather events. So we see reducing US greenhouse gas emissions as really essential to addressing the dual global challenges of poverty and climate change. So policies and regulations can really drive changes in evidence use, or in energy use, and emissions reduction, and in climate resilience. But to kind of ensure that these policies are effectively increasing decarbonization and really combating climate change effectively, it's essential that they're grounded in solid evidence. And in the current political environment, where we're really just seeing limited federal commitment to climate programming and investment, we really are looking to the leadership of state and local jurisdictions and organizations in the coming months and years to drive decarbonization programming. So we're really excited to be supporting these leaders in their efforts and to really work together to test and to learn which strategies are most effective in the battle against climate change. So just briefly, I want to kind of focus in on some of the key reasons why we're really seeing randomized evaluation of decarbonization programming as really an important component to this work. So first, rigorous evidence on what works to reduce emissions is really limited. So most decisions are based on engineering projections, which have built-in assumptions around behavior change that have not, in most cases, been rigorously tested in the real world. But behavior change really is critical to emissions reductions, right? So I think many state and local governments and other organizations are experimenting with different types of interventions that involve a range of incentives, different types of designs, and different recruitment strategies. And many of these programs really rely on behavior change. So for example, providing rebates to encourage individuals to purchase things like heat pumps, right? But there's still so much that's unknown about how to structure and really target decarbonization programs to really bring about the intended behavior change that program is depending on. So as these new programs roll out, we have this opportunity to really proactively embed randomized evaluations into those programs in order to accurately measure their impacts. So I'll provide just a very brief primer to help situate kind of where and when randomized evaluation can be used to promote evidence-based decision-making. So along kind of this broader program life cycle that you can see on the screen, there's a number of different types of questions that evidence can help us answer, right? So when identifying and diagnosing a problem, when adapting or designing a program, when implementing and evaluating a program's impact, and when deciding whether to scale a program. So there's a lot of different uses of data throughout a program. I think randomized evaluation and other impact evaluation methodologies are really most applicable in that third category, right? So this is implementation and evaluation. And impact evaluation at this stage can really help us answer questions like, were the goals of the program achieved? And what is the causal effect of the program on certain outcomes? So with that context, I'm just going to talk in a little bit more detail about what a randomized evaluation actually looks like and how it works. So we can start with a pool of people, or perhaps it's buildings or neighborhoods, who kind of meet the eligibility criteria for a particular program. And from that pool, we can randomly assign people into two groups. And so this really is a random assignment. So something you could think like lottery, where it really is kind of a random selection. And with randomization, we can be confident that these groups do not differ systematically at the beginning of the study. And this doesn't mean that they're identical. So it's not like everyone in one group has a twin in the other group, right? So there's still going to be some variation. But the key here is that there's no pattern. So everyone has the same probability of being in each of these groups. And with a large enough sample, we should expect no major differences between these two groups. So we can compare them like apples to apples. But in contrast, if people are sorted into groups through non-randomized means, such as by comparing those who opt into a program to those who opt out, or those who are mandated to participate in a program compared to those who are not, there's often a really high chance that there's going to be important differences between these two groups that could impact our results. So for example, if we offer a program on a first come, first served basis, the people who sign up first might have really different characteristics than those who did not. They might have access to different resources or, to computers. They may be able to jump in a car more quickly to get to certain locations. And all of those differences might end up impacting our outcomes of interest. So in these scenarios, we're looking at this as comparing apples to oranges. So when you do randomly assign groups, the key here is that the only difference is the one that you introduce, which is your intervention or your program. And then when you're able to look at your outcomes, because these groups were the same at the outset, you can conclude that any differences that you see in outcomes at the end is really due to the program itself. And this is why randomized evaluations are really uniquely positioned to tell us the impact of a program and why they can just be so valuable for informing evidence-based policies. Okay, so now I'll talk a little bit more about what the Climate Action Learning Lab is and kind of how it's leveraging this methodology to inform evidence-based practices within the climate mitigation space. So I'd say over the last 18 months or so, JPAL has had many conversations with local decision makers and partners. And we understand that there can be a lot of barriers to really implementing an impact evaluation on the ground, regardless of how beneficial they can be to really informing the programming. So we have learned that they can be challenging to prioritize. They require a lot of team capacity building and support to really identify testable, policy-relevant research questions. And it can also just be difficult to find and partner with researchers who can really support evaluation design and implementation. So over the last year or so, JPAL North America has built out what we're calling the Climate Action Learning Lab, which is really a new and free program that aims to address those key barriers. And so the Learning Lab is focusing support for climate leaders in three key areas. The first is building skills and knowledge in evidence generation and use. The second is reviewing and applying research insights to local contexts and programs. And the third is to identify priority research questions to really guide evidence building and decision-making practices. So from May to July of 2025 of this year, Learning Lab participants are going to be engaged in this kind of broader suite of offerings that we anticipate will take about 1 to 2 hours of time per week. And participants are going to be engaging in kind of 4 different types of programming that I'll walk through quickly. So first, in this training component, Learning Lab participants are going to be joining kind of a series of virtual training sessions that cover topics like key evaluation concepts, such as, why and how do we randomize? What do theory of change frameworks look like, and how can that apply to this work? What are different evaluation designs, and kind of where and how is randomized evaluation best used? We're also going to be reviewing a number of learning agenda frameworks to kind of support how to scope programs for rigorous evaluation opportunities. And we're also going to be providing some evidence reviews of common mitigation programming and related policy insights. Oh, and yep, now we're into peer learning, which is kind of the second component of what we're talking about here. So these peer learning sessions are going to be offered periodically to allow Climate Action Learning Lab cohort members really engage with each other to share questions, insights, and experiences around the design and use of impact evaluations. And for the third category of content, we're really looking to support participants in applying the insights from these trainings as well as the peer learning sessions to their local contexts and programs. So to do that, JPAL staff will be providing kind of these customized one-on-one strategy sessions with each participating jurisdiction and organization to kind of provide that level of support in applying those key concepts. And then finally, we're going to be sponsoring 2 participants per jurisdiction or organization to attend an in-person summit here in Cambridge, Massachusetts this July. And during the summit, Learning Lab participants will be able to really connect with each other, as well as with researchers in the JPAL network and other climate leaders. So at the end of the Learning Lab, our goal is kind of multifold, right? I think one is that we really want each jurisdiction organization to have completed what we're calling an evidence and evaluation playbook. And this is something that Learning Lab participants will be kind of contributing to throughout this engagement. And at the end, we are going to help these jurisdictions and organizations highlight relevant insights from the existing climate evidence base, to kind of identify a set of prioritized research questions that can really guide the design and implementation of priority decarbonization programs, and to also have a strategic evaluation plan for a priority research question. Interested teams will also receive public recognition as champions for evidence use in climate action. And select jurisdictions are also going to be matched with researchers from the JPAL network to really move into designing a randomized evaluation of their policy or program. And these research teams will have the opportunity to apply for up to $400,000 in JPAL funding to implement those randomized evaluation. And then finally, JPAL is also hoping to be able to continue to offer virtual peer learning engagements post-July to kind of continue facilitating that community of practice through periodic facilitated meetings and a moderated online platform. So finally, I'll just kind of end with a thought on who should apply. So here we're really prioritizing local decision makers who are committed to advancing effective solutions to climate mitigation. So in particular, we're targeting jurisdictions and organizations that may be launching a climate action plan or perhaps a broader set of programs in the coming 6 months to 2 years, or grant recipients who received funding for a climate mitigation program. We're also looking to engage jurisdictions and organizations who might be planning to apply for grant funding for climate mitigation strategies and would like to build an evaluation into their proposal in order to strengthen it. Great. So what does a randomized evaluation of residential energy efficiency programming actually look like in practice? So we're thrilled now to have Erica Myers here with us today to really provide a concrete example of an impact evaluation in this space and how this evaluation is really helping to inform key policy questions and improve programming. So from here, I'll hand it over to Erica.
Great. Thanks so much, Erin. So the project that I'm going to talk about is joint work with Peter Christensen and Paul Francisco, who are going to be part of the panel discussion later. And the project is in the context of the Weatherization Assistance Program, as Erin already mentioned, and that's the US's largest residential weatherization program. It's been around since the 1970s, and it's served several billion or millions of households. So the funding comes through the Department of Energy, but it's administered by state and local. And its primary goal is to reduce energy bills for low-income households while maintaining health and safety. So government contractors perform retrofits that are meant to improve energy efficiency and help households to consume less energy. So next slide. So we collaborated in particular with the Illinois implementation of the program. And the starting point for our work was this observation that had been made internally by practitioners and also by academics that there were these discrepancies between projected and realized savings from the program. So our collaboration actually began with a descriptive study. We were trying to understand what might be driving that. We called it a wedge between the projected and realized savings. And we dug into the 3 most common explanations, which were bias in the models that were predicting the savings, issues with the workmanship or the quality of installation, and then also occupant behavior. So in particular, we were interested in something known as the rebound effect or the take-back effect, which is when you make homes more energy efficient, sometimes because it's less expensive, people will use more energy services. So that might have been part of what was driving that wedge between projected and realized savings. But interestingly, we found that occupant behavior was only a minor component compared to these other two. So in thinking about workmanship and issues with quality of installation, we decided to investigate whether changing worker incentives could potentially improve outcomes in the program. So we considered paying them based on something known as building envelope tightness. Basically, it's a measure of how drafty the home is. So how many cracks are there, like around the windows where air is getting in, or in the attic or foundation, etc. And this is something that's measured by a blower door reading. And there's a little cartoon graphic of it here. Essentially, a trained professional puts a seal over the front door, and then there's a fan you can turn on to try to draw air out of the house. And the more resistance you get to that, the tighter the building envelope, or the less cracks and leaks you have in the outside of your home. So the reason that we chose to do this measure of building envelope tightness rather than energy savings, which is the outcome we ultimately care about, is that it's something that's immediately observable. So you don't have to wait a year or two to get winter billing data to evaluate it. And it's something that's already done as part of the program. At the beginning, there's an energy audit, and then also at the end. And often the people that are doing work on the homes have their own blower door reading as well, so they can kind of measure how they're doing as they go. And it also can't be affected by household behavior, right? So we're not rewarding contractors because someone took a long vacation or something like that. It has to do with the physical structure of the home itself. And then finally, it is something that's highly correlated with energy savings. So if we get workers to make homes tighter, then we're also going to increase energy savings. Okay, thanks. Next slide. So in terms of the study design, we offered a performance incentive based on air sealing, or this building envelope tightness measure, where they go beyond a certain target. And the bonus was paid on top of the preset compensation for a project. So there was already compensation based on the different tasks that the contractors were being asked to do. And that part of the program didn't change. We just said, for any amount of tightness or that you go beyond the target, we're going to pay an incentive. So what we did is we randomly assigned jobs into one of three groups. The high treatment group, which received $1 for each unit of air sealing beyond target. The low payment group, which received 40 cents for each unit of air sealing beyond target. And then we had a comparison group that only received the preset compensation. So next slide. So the randomization was actually implemented through IWAP's administrative software that generated the work orders. So language about the incentive was clearly printed out on the work order at the start of the job. So here we have an example from the high $1 payment. So we told contractors, right at the top of the work order, the architectural work on this job is going to be eligible for a bonus of $1 US for each unit below the target. And then we remind them what the target is for this particular job. So the target for this job is 1,200 units of reduction. And then we do a little bit of math for them, which is relatively simple with the $1 payment, maybe more helpful with the 40-cent payment. But just sort of says, hey, if you have a reduction of 1,400 units, then you're going to receive $200 US bonus payment. A reduction of 1,600 units will receive a $400 bonus payment, and so on. All right, next slide. So the intervention had an effect as intended on air sealing. So homes were less leaky and more airtight as a result of the intervention. Contractors on these treatment jobs were actually less likely to get called back for deficiencies about the house. So the inspections were cleaner as well. And importantly, it had a large effect on natural gas savings. So reducing energy consumption a further 24% on top of the standard program with no incentives. One thing to note is there were slightly higher gas savings from the higher payment than the lower payment. But given how much more we paid for that higher payment, the lower payment was actually more effective from a returns per dollar spent perspective. So that's also a useful insight that like this is an effective intervention, and it also kind of gives us insight on where to target the payment level. All right, next slide. So in terms of key takeaways from this work are that these randomized evaluations can provide credible estimates of the causal impact and offer key policy insights. In this case, the incentive for air sealing had already been tried in the Chicago implementation of the program, and we thought it was going well, but it was implemented at the same time as many other changes. So we couldn't isolate the effect of just this change in how the incentives were done without this randomized study. Another key takeaway is the importance of data collection in facilitating evaluation. So even before we started working with IWAP and with Paul, they were collecting data on home measurements, pre and post upgrades, and they were getting energy consumption data from utilities. So that was an important part of this project. And as part of the application process, participants agree to have their utility data shared for the purposes of evaluation. So sometimes if you have a program going and there's data you need like that, or you need permission, adding it to the participation form can be helpful. So the right data collection helped with forming hypotheses, and then you can incorporate randomization, and you can respond to what you learn. And in some cases, you can make pretty rapid and iterative improvements on the program through this process. So next slide. So these academic practitioner partnerships can create highly valuable learning opportunities for organizations. It can also help academics with dissemination and uptake of ideas. So for example, Paul networks with practitioners and attends conferences where they present work like this. And he's also on the Building Performance Association. So through his role there, he made recommendations for how the Home Owner Managing Energy Savings Program, the HOMES program in the IRA, models and tracks savings. So that was very helpful in terms of actually having an impact. And then the challenges, of course, are that it takes time for both sides. So academics have to learn about the program, and practitioners have to take time to learn how to identify and target these kinds of opportunities. And it's often not incentivized from either side to form these types of partnerships. And sometimes the publication potential doesn't always align with policy importance, so it can sometimes create frictions there as well. So I guess with that, we can tee off the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Erica, for that really interesting overview of the Illinois Home Weatherization Assistance Program. I'm excited to bring Peter Christensen and Paul Francisco in for some further discussion. After about 15 minutes of our discussion, I'll move us into some audience Q&A. So to folks in the audience, please feel free to submit your questions throughout, and we'll get to them in a moment. But for now, welcome Peter and Paul, and thank you so much for joining us. I think to start, I'll kick it back to you, to Erica, to share a little bit more about your role in particular in this evaluation, and how you got involved in it in the first place.
Yeah, I was giving a presentation on some work that I'd done on residential energy efficiency on campus. and someone was aware of Paul and the work that he did. I'll have Paul introduce himself and explain that in a moment. But they suggested that I meet with him. So I basically cold emailed him, told him that I was interested in this work. And Peter was a new professor like me. He just started at University of Illinois, and I said, hey, I have this great opportunity to meet with Paul Francisco, who's doing work on this weatherization assistance program. Would you like to come with me to go meet with him? So I think that's how it all got started. But Paul, why don't you tell them what your role was and why you had access to all this awesome data?
Sure, yeah. So I was also at the University of Illinois at the time, and when I got so at the University of Illinois, we were delivering some of the training for the people who were doing this work in the IWAP program, teaching them how, new people into the program, how to go out and do these assessments to figure out what measures to do in the homes. So I'd been working with the IWAP since about 2004, and had over the years also gotten to where I was involved with policy issues and best practice issues in terms of measures at the national level, doing evaluations of the national program on things like indoor air quality and energy savings. So, so that's how I've been involved with the weatherization program, through that point. And yeah, so people knew me. They told Erica about me, and when Erica reached out to me, it was at a time when the weatherization program, they'd gotten a huge influx of funding from Obama's American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or ARA, and so there was a lot of scrutiny on it at the time. And so when Erica reached out to me, it seemed like it was worth a conversation.
Thanks so much. And finally, Peter, would you mind introducing yourself and anything else you have to share about how you got involved in this evaluation?
Yeah, great. My name is Peter Christensen. I'm Associate Professor of Economics at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And I think Erica and Paul did a great job of describing the way that this collaboration came about. The one thing that I'll add is that from the outset, I think that one of the sort of key features of the partnership that everybody collectively identified was a common set of goals. And so there were data resources and an evaluation effort already underway. And we were all interested in understanding where the program was being effective, where the program might not be effective, and what could be done about it. I think even from day one. And so that common set of goals, I think even in our very early meetings, it was clear for everybody who was participating in this partnership that we were, even though we would occupy different roles in the partnership and may have, different incentives, timelines, capacity, et cetera, that we were all interested in the same sort of outcome. So that I think that played a very, very important role early on.
Thanks for sharing. It's always super interesting to hear about how these fruitful partnerships come about. And it's very clear that you all had a very fruitful partnership together, which we'll talk more about in a moment. But first, moving on, I'd love to hear some more about the intervention design itself. So how did you come up with this performance pay intervention design? And Paul, I think I'll start with you since, as you've described, you have so many years of experience working with weatherization programs.
Sure. Yeah, well, first, I want to also share one thing that kind of touches on the previous question as part of the motivation for getting into all of this, which is that, having worked in the weatherization program for so long, I really believe very strongly in it and the benefits that it has. I've been in people's houses and seen how transformative it can be for their lives. And so, as I said, with the level of scrutiny that there was, of the program at the time, largely because of ERA, I felt like if we did a really good evaluation where we had people who knew how to run the trials and do the analyses combined with people who understood the program, then we could really demonstrate the effects. And it's easy to do an analysis of an evaluation of a program you don't understand and do it badly because you didn't understand the program. And so this partnership allowed us to make sure that we could design it really well, including the decision on the measures that we were going to study, with a deep understanding of the inner workings of the program from a practical perspective, not just a what if it works like this perspective, right? So I think that was part of my thing, is I felt like it was an opportunity to really be able to demonstrate rigorously what I believe to be true, that the program did a lot of good. And if we found that it didn't do as well, that's where the data leads us, right? So that I had to acknowledge that. In terms of the decision to do the blower door test, it is something that it is done on every home. And it is almost every home. There's a very small slice of homes for which there's a reason to not do it. But so it's done on almost every home. Practically every home does get some reduction. There are very few measures that are done in every home. Some homes are already well insulated, so they don't need new insulation. Some homes have a furnace that works just fine. They don't need a new furnace. So when we're looking at big measures, the measures that really move the needle a lot on energy, they tend to be insulation in the attic, insulation in the wall, new heating system, and air sealing. So with the air sealing one being the one that, even if some homes are already pretty tight, they don't need a lot of additional air sealing, it's still done on every home, and every home has a target. And therefore, and that target scales. If you have a leakier home, the amount you want to reduce it by is much larger. So it really scales with the home, but it's done on every home. And it is something that, as Erica said, is quantified at the beginning, at the end, and oftentimes in the middle. So it was a metric that has been viewed as central, absolutely central to the savings potential in these homes. And so it was one that kind of had all the features, one that was in broad use, one that we could quantify fairly readily. And it's not like with insulation, how many inches, you're only going from like 6 to 19 inches or so. This was anywhere between like 700 and 10,000 in increments of one. So it was a really finely tunable metric for this. So it had a lot of features that made it a good option, as well as the way has frequently been compensated for is you just get a package. You get $450 as a contractor to do all the air sealing. So it's not incentivized based on how much you do generally. So it gave us also a different trigger to work on.
Yeah, and I might add to that that's something that Peter and I couldn't have come up with without Paul, right? We didn't know those details, and he was really key in identifying this as a really useful thing to incentivize. I think we were originally thinking energy savings, but we were kind of running into the practicality of, well, what if we have to wait 2 years till we can see the bills before we can quantify a home's energy savings? And what if there's something about there was a big change in who lived in the home, and that changed and we're rewarding contractors for behavior. So yeah, it was something as academics I think we couldn't have done without the partnership with Paul.
Yeah, completely agree with that. And I guess I'll point to a different aspect of the partnership in terms of developing research ideas. Just a slightly different angle. So first, coming back to something that Erica said during her presentation, we had other observational analysis that was pointing to workmanship and contractor services as being one of the factors that could explain this wedge between projected and realized savings in the program, which had been identified internally for more than a decade. And so I think, we had a lot of meetings early on where we talked about what could be done. Why might the performance of contractors in the program be varying so much, and what could be done there? And I think, economists and social scientists, sort of the idea that how they're compensated, what the incentives are, as a key sort of factor potentially in improving performance across the board, or even just making it more uniformly high, could be important. And I think that that was already clear to Paul. And just another thing that I'll say about the partnership, we've now done multiple projects in addition to this RCT. This has really been a collaboration that's lasted for 10 years. And for those who might be out in the audience and thinking about how to improve programs that are being implemented in the jurisdiction that you are part of and oversee, for an academic researcher, developing this kind of long run partnership where we're able to really understand the institutional details of a program and potentially do a series of ask a series of questions, bring different methods to bear on potentially improving a program and have more impact over time. That's something that's a really big opportunity from the academic researcher standpoint. And I think that it makes the work better from all sides. And so, this sort of commitment, the RCT was, and developing a set of research questions. This has really been a partnership that, over that's really persisted and lasted because of all of, the collective impetus to identify areas where we might bring the analytical tools that we're into, and that we have expertise in, and the data that's already being collected in the program to really make it better. And we're still involved in developing new ideas and new projects. So it's not just a one-off. And I think that that's part of understanding kind of what the potential is for really doing good work and proposing, high impact interventions.
It's so great to hear that this has been such a long-lasting partnership, and it's really clear how, from all sides, you've all just contributed your expertise to bring about some really interesting research questions. I'd like to learn more about how you chose a randomized design to answer your research questions, in particular about the Illinois Home Weatherization Assistance Program. Why did you choose a randomized design? I think maybe Peter, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll be brief on this. I think everybody understood the potential benefit of an RCT. Of course, there's a cost associated with it too. But for academic researchers, we were able to get the financial support, and that's really critical. Also, in thinking about the Climate Action Learning Lab, there are a lot of resources available for doing this sort of bringing frontier research methods to the evaluation of public programs. And so we were able to do that in this case. But as Erica mentioned in the presentation, this was an intervention, pay for performance, that had been implemented in Chicago, but had been implemented by a very forward-thinking leader of the program there, who was making all kinds of changes at the same time. So we came in and sort of thought, well, we could do an observational study of pay for performance. Potentially, we'd like to do that in Chicago, but we can't really disentangle the effects of that from the effects of everything else that this very forward-looking manager named John Patty had done. And it was immediately clear how the RCT methodology would allow us to do that and disentangle the effects in a very rigorous way. And as Erica showed, we were able to do that and show that not only did it have what were the magnitude of its effects on air sealing, which we directly, were incentivizing through the intervention, but also on gas use reductions. And that allowed us to actually compare the benefits in terms of all the private and social benefits of reducing gas use in these homes to the costs of the intervention. And that's a really critical thing in terms of being able to go further in proposing more widespread use of an intervention like this. And it requires this kind of very precise methodology to be able to wind up with that sort of provide that sort of level of information.
Erica or Paul, do you have anything to add?
Maybe just something small, that even beyond the fact that multiple things had changed in Chicago, to that graphic that Erin put up where she was showing that you have apples to apples versus oranges to apples. It turned out Chicago is also just a really different set of building stock than the rest of Illinois. So when we were trying to see if they were sort of comparable before John Patty came in, they weren't very comparable either. So another thing that randomization gave us were this apples to apples comparison, where we have some jobs in the same part of the state with the same housing stock getting this incentive and some not.
I think that's a great segue into our first question from the audience, kind of getting at, if there's potential for cross-state investigations of these questions. So I'll go ahead and read it. The variation in weatherization programs and energy efficiency support provided by utilities differs significantly across states. Utilities report to the EIA on the level of energy efficiency support they provide to consumers. Do you think there is an opportunity to measure the cross-state effects of these programs to build a stronger case for policy support of these programs?
For sure. I think, yeah, you go first, Paul, please.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think there is, and as the questioner said, like within the weatherization program, utilities are different, of course. It's a different landscape. But within the weatherization program, every state gets to say how they're going to implement it, as long as it follows the key DOE requirements. But other than following those key DOE requirements, do it however you want. Just tell us how you're going to do it, and that's what you're going to be held to. So Illinois can be different from Iowa, can be different from Indiana, can definitely be different from New Mexico and Arizona and Florida and Mississippi and North Dakota, Washington State, et cetera. So I think absolutely, if efforts were taken to, and there have been these sorts of efforts in the past, not at the academic level like this with the researchers, but more with program analysts. So kind of the gray literature that are reports for DOE or specific states where, maybe half a dozen states have asked for an evaluation by somebody, and then somebody can look at those half a dozen evaluations as kind of a meta-analysis. But if we really did look at each state or a set of states or however many states, we could do the same kind of analysis. And I believe that we would then be able to say, okay, these things seem to be really driving better results in this state. And they're maybe not being done as much in another state. But in that state, we're seeing that this thing seems to really be driving better results, and be able to identify what's working in some states, what's not working in some states, and be able to use that. If we actually did that, we would be able to use that to, I think, inform the program to give even better outcomes to residents by learning essentially from what's working in each state. So we have that opportunity theoretically because of how many different programs there are out there if we were able to do that. And I think, one of the things I've always also appreciated about the weatherization program, the reason that practitioners and kind of in the gray literature, it's been known that there is a mismatch between projected and realized savings for decades, is because it is a program that wants to look at itself and figure out how to do better. Because in the end, it's about, you're in a home one time and you have one opportunity to touch that family and that home and make it the best you can. And so there's a strong desire to use data to figure out how to make the program better. And so I think that it also, as long as it is done reasonably well and by people they trust, then there is an openness to having this kind of discussion and see what can translate from one state to another. And the same sort of thing could be done at the utility level too. I use weatherization as an example because that's what I'm most familiar with. But utilities run different programs too. The same sort of thing, in theory, could be done.
Yeah, I think the big thing we would need is some kind of data harmonization. And I think in weatherization, there's a big opportunity for that because you have states like Illinois that are already getting the energy consumption data and have the programmatic data as well. And we've even talked to Paul about something like that before. And what makes it difficult is having to coordinate with each utility in each state because the utility is a separate entity than the people that are doing the upgrades and the weatherization. But I think there's huge opportunity there if someone could invest the resources to try to get that data harmonization from multiple places. And there'd be such an opportunity to learn, as Paul articulated really well.
And I guess just one thing I'll add to that, the coordination and resources capacity, those are the factors that are create obstacles to doing this kind of work, because I think there is a lot of interest. Everybody understands that there's so much that could be learned. One of the goals of the Climate Action Learning Lab, and actually the benefits of it even already, even though it's relatively young, is how much coordination is going on across jurisdictions. And so the potential for doing multi-state or multi-jurisdiction projects, RCTs, coordinating those, what you need is the entity exactly, one of the things that you need is the entity exactly like this one, which is coordinating both the research community and the policy community to be able to generate those types of projects and then fund them. And they do require a higher level of funding. And there's a lot of interest within this effort in doing that kind of work because everybody sees it as the frontier and that there's so much learning potential there. So if you're interested in that kind of work, please reach out to us and let us know, because that's something that there's a lot of discussion right now about.
Absolutely. So I think, unfortunately, we have time for just one more question. So I'd like to ask all of you, what recommendations do you have for state and local jurisdictions looking to enter into a successful researcher-practitioner partnership? Erica, I'll start with you.
Great question. I think, yeah, engaging with JPAL is a great first step because I think, I mentioned briefly in my presentation that it's sort of challenging from both sides, right? Like the academics need a crash course in the program and all of the details of implementation. And then sometimes the organizations themselves need a crash course in how to identify opportunities where you might have a large enough sample size, where you might be able to incorporate randomization into your program, where you might already have existing data that would allow you to sort of evaluate, the effects of this intervention. So yeah, I think starting to sort of structure your thinking about what parts, like what are some important questions and that we have about how we could improve this program. And then where are there opportunities within the program where there could be some randomization and learning? I think that would be my answer there, yeah.
Go ahead, Paul, if you want.
Okay. Sure. So I think there's a few things. One is what Peter said earlier about making sure that there's a commonality in goals and that we all are aligned on the mission. If my goal was that I wanted to be able to hopefully demonstrate that the weatherization program was working pretty well, and also identify ways to improve. And Peter's and Erica's goal had been to show that the weatherization program didn't work and was a waste of money. Then we would not have done so well because we would be working at cross purposes. So I think making sure that you've got mission alignment among all parties is really, really important. I think having people that are trusted is also really important. Um, as I said, weatherization program was under a lot of scrutiny when it first came to light to DOE that this project was getting started. I got a call asking me about it because they were nervous because they didn't know Peter and Erica and didn't know what their agendas were. And but they knew me, and so they're like, okay, we'll give you a chance. So having that trusted partnership with whoever it is, whatever program you're trying to work with, is really key. And then I think patience with each other. And Eric was talking about needing to learn the program. I also needed to learn the language of economics. We definitely had meetings where we were all speaking English and we had no idea what each other was saying. And so there has to be some allowance for taking the time to understand each other and what it means so you don't start going down these rabbit holes and realize nobody was trying to go there, but now you're in this hole. So it definitely takes time and patience and grace as you get through kind of those language barriers.
I think like a year in, Peter and I would sometimes present a new result to Paul, and he'd be like, and we'd be interpreting it one way, and he said, no, that's not how the program works. So it was so important to have those checks. Sorry, Peter, I didn't mean to jump in there.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing quickly. I think developing a commitment within, the organization or agency, which involves multiple stakeholders and multiple, folks in different roles, to the use of research to improve program effectiveness. I mean, I think everybody on this webinar is probably already sold on that idea, but the extent to which that can be sort of socialized across an agency, that's really important early on. I think Paul did an excellent job of that, and I think some of that had already been done before we were that the groundwork had been laid before our partnership. But that really, and understanding how that might create a long run, have really important effects on the long run impacts of a program is quite important for being able to do this kind of work and ultimately become thought leaders. And I think that that's really what part of what the power is for agencies and organizations who make this kind of commitment.
Well, thank you so much to the three of you for taking the time to share some really valuable insights and for engaging in such an interesting conversation. Really quickly, before we close out, I just wanted to share some next steps for folks who are interested in the Climate Action Learning Lab. Applications are due March 31st. The QR code will bring you to a link tree that has a list of resources, including a link to the Learning Lab webpage and application form, a place to sign up for office hours with JPAL staff for those of you who might be interested in discussing this opportunity further. And we'll also have a list of conducted and ongoing studies by researchers in the JPAL network related to climate mitigation. We'll also send a Linktree link and a follow-up email to all webinar registrants, along with a link to this webinar recording and slide deck. Finally, we'd really appreciate it if you could take a minute to complete this feedback survey to let us know what you thought of this webinar. There's also a section for you to share your thoughts on what you would find most helpful from the Learning Lab. We really value your input as we launch these offerings, and we hope to hear from you. Thank you so much, everyone. And with that, we can close.